Welcome to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Every week, I'll be sitting down with a sales executive where they'll share their stories and experiences that produce game-changing results. Let's be honest, sales can be a tough game. I'm sure at some point, we've all delivered a less than stellar demo, been ghosted by a client or two, and sometimes maybe we did more talking than listening. And that's where I can help. The stories and insights our guests share can be applied to your own business, your territory, or with your team, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Our weekly tactics and strategies help you get out of your head and start creating your own path towards game-changing results. Welcome back to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Now, we continue to celebrate women in Women's History Month. And when you think about women supporting women, women advocating, and really, just being that cheerleading squad for them, helping them, connecting them, there's one woman that comes to mind. And I am so grateful to share the conversation I had with that woman, Lori Richardson. And Lori is a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of expertise, and just a connector bringing people together. And she gets this experience starting from being a teacher. Then she moved into tech sales to support her role as a single mom. And now, she is the podcast host of Conversations with Women in Sales. She's the founder of Score More Sales, and she's the author of She Sells. And so she just breathes this everywhere she goes, and she definitely is selfless in her approach. And I can say I have firsthand benefited from that, from whether it's introductions, just creating a really inclusive, safe environment for us to learn and thrive together. And I know you will take something away from this, whether you are a male sales leader, and perhaps reinviting you to think about, having a diverse team and what that can do to the performance, to your brand, to your the experience you provide for your customers, and also for women. How can we bet on ourselves? How can we know our self-worth, lean into those perhaps uncomfortable situations and do it anyway? And some of the suggestions Lori says is, start small. When you go into a meeting, when you're in an uncomfortable situation, what's one thing that you'll commit to doing? And you probably won't die from doing it. Might be a bit uncomfortable, but through time and repetitions, you don't even think about it after a while. So take a listen. Let us know what you think. And as always, thanks for watching. So as we continue with Women's History Month, I am delighted to bring one of the main gurus of women in sales to the podcast. Welcome, Lori Richardson.
Hey, Karen. It's great to see you.
Great to see you as well. Thank you so much for lending us your time and your voice. I know you're a huge advocate, and I know that you're going to share a lot of both from your personal experience as well as your knowledge and expertise that are definitely going to help other women perhaps lean in when they don't want to and take their well-deserved seat at the table. So, Lori, you are a connector. You're always bringing women together. Sometimes, just for the sheer nature of, but maybe there will be a synergy down the road, or maybe times there's an obvious connection. But I'm just wondering where this came from. Did somebody earlier in your career, do that to you, and it's kind of the law of reciprocity? Is it just something that's innate within you?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know if anyone's ever asked me that, actually. I'm a lifelong learner. And so part of that is meeting interesting people. And a long time ago, I realized that if you hang around interesting people, you're going to learn something. You're going to learn interesting things, most likely. And so I think the introductions, I think it came through just being in sales and just, connecting as a seller. We always want to add value, and connecting our customers or our prospects to other good people. It has always been something I've done. I must have learned that early on from some of my colleagues that I worked with, some of my mentors, early mentors, who, by the way, were mostly all men, because that's the environment I was in. But I also worked with some really great women in my first sales role too.
So it's almost like a selflessness. But the irony is a lot of people that's not obvious for some. They're always trying to self promote. So I think the fact that you can see that in others and And that's what value is. I mean, I know it's such an overused word, but when you can bring people together and when you can make an introduction either with a colleague or even as with a prospect that down the line, they turn into a partner or they perhaps buy a piece of technology off them, they dotted line back to you.
Yeah, and I know that I learned from my dad about being abundant. Uh, there's plenty for everybody out there. We don't always have to be hustling our hashtag to everybody and, promoting this and that when we have an opportunity, because people can figure it out. People are smart. And if they're interested, and if somebody said, "Oh, you have a book," it's like they can look it up on Amazon and probably find it. And
Mm-hmm.
if not, they can connect on LinkedIn. So people are not stupid. And I want to give people credit for that, and then not push stuff. I've never been a pushy kind of seller, and I like that. I like that you can be a helper and still be in a sales profession like we're in.
Yeah, and a few things there. Abundant. I want to top on abundant for a moment, but before that, a lot of the women founders that I coach, and they say, but I don't sell, or I hate the word sales, and it almost elicits a physical response. And but when you replace it with the word help, you can see everything change, their manners and their approach, and when they feel like I have to be this person or become this or say this to be in sales, that is all almost um, hanging off the word sales. But when they come from the lens of I want to help, it's just their tone is of service. It's kind of back to them having lunch with a friend.
Yeah, it is so funny. I stopped working with entrepreneurs because that's what I would hear. I can sell anything except myself.
Hmm.
And I worked with coaches for a while, and I realized I got to get back to B2B, and I want a manager. It's like I did today. I hadn't heard from a couple of people on a team, so I sent the VP sales a note, and I said, "Hey, only Bob, or that's not his real name. He's the only one that's responded so far." And so, boom, boom, boom. All of a sudden, I had emails from other people, and I didn't have to do personal intros and comments to each one. It's like it's great. I love that. But you're right. When you turn it in, it's just like posting on LinkedIn. People go, "Oh, I don't really want to toot my own horn." It's like, "Oh, but what if you knew that you were helping other
Hmm.
women who are building their voice?" Oh, that's fantastic. Even leaders, I've talked to women in very senior leadership positions in big companies who hadn't thought of that because they just said, "I just don't like to post on LinkedIn." It's
Hmm.
like, but what if it could help people?
Yeah.
Oh, so that's an interesting switch up.
A reframe, but I think also when you think about a leader, like they're modeling the behavior, and when they're not doing that, basically they're saying this is acceptable behavior for the team below, whether it's language, whether it's liking. I mean, I just think when you like, you're just blending in, you're further blending in, further commoditizing yourself. And there's no comments. There's a huge opportunity there, right, for people looking at your profile, perhaps connecting with you because you're the only one that commented, and it might have been something that was really intriguing.
Yeah, and look, I know people are busy, especially if you're a woman in leadership and maybe you're a parent or you have parents that you're helping out. The sandwich generation, this it can be a tough time for people, and women are so involved in all of that. But it literally could take a few minutes a week. I mean, it's not a big ask, and I think that for the for what you get out of that to help build who you are and what you think out there, it definitely will help in the next job, the next role that you look for, and also it can help other people.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I think a lot of it, they say it's time, but to be honest, I feel it's that fear and putting yourself out there because once especially if you comment against the gradient, you're afraid of the backlash. And what did I do? I've exposed myself. But I just think the more you do that, the more comfortable you get and the more almost, you know, of a thick shell you develop that this is my point of view. It might not be shared with everybody, but I'm okay with that. And it's still what I believe in. And I think there's some real comfort and strength in that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not about being liked. It's about having a point of view that could be respected, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think about just even having a point of view, a lot of people, there's so many just look alike, sound alike. And it's like, what can you do to come at it from a different lens, a different angle, to be different so that you do stand out? And I think there's a real opportunity for that.
Yeah, if you don't have a point of view, I mean, why bother? Why waste anybody's time? It's just more noise out there. We need to really be out there talking about how we feel and what we believe and how we can help other people and be different and be, be outspoken if need be.
Hmm. And I feel that's a shift from when it was, I have to share my perfections and all my accolades. And I remember someone saying to me years ago, they said, Karen, people connect with your imperfections, not your perfections. And that was just that opportunity to really, show like vulnerability at its core. And then people relate to you. And then that's when they start engaging with you and connecting with you. And I can tell you, even in my speaking, I notice a shift that I want to be relatable. I don't want to be this sage on the stage. And people come up to me after. And I just think that's the approach we have to take, is that we're all in this together. And if, I can learn or avoid a step from your mistake, then hopefully you can do the same for me.
Yeah, I just think that we're all flawed human beings and we can all learn from each other. We all have lessons to share no matter who we are. Just have to
Yeah,
be open to them.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, accountability and ownership is definitely part of it. I think a lot of the times where I couldn't get past things is that earlier in my career, I wasn't taking ownership for them. Right. And so I was kind of blaming it, and I got a bad territory, and the price is too high. But the moment I said, you know what, Karen, that you you overspoke there, or you didn't social proof, or you didn't, multi-throw, whatever it was, then I could say a bit of, guilt and discomfort there. But I knew that I could fix it then, because I was the one that caused it. I think there's power there. And that's how, you start, the mistakes become less cringy and they become lessons.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've always heard over the years, because I've been a student of sales, I say for decades, and then I say, no, no, 4 decades.
Yeah.
It's actually four, not just for decades. And there, over the years, people have surfaced stories about someone who had just a horrific territory and how they turned it around. And there are a lot of ways you can kind of pump yourself up if you feel like you're not well off in terms of how things are going at work. But you also need to feel inspired, and you need to work for someone that is supportive of you, like your immediate supervisor, your immediate manager. And that's where I think some of the trouble is for women in sales roles, is that a lot of times the sales manager is male, who probably did really well in his role, got promoted, didn't get any training about how to work with different types of people, and
Hmm.
wants or expects everyone to do the same thing he did to be successful. And that just doesn't work. So I always, I'll work with a team of women in a company that are all in sales, but I also insist on working with their managers as well separately, because that's where they are going to get support or no support in some cases, and that's where they're going to get stuck and not promoted on further if that happens. So it's really important to have people that you respect, that you work for and around, and a product or service that is something you can sell, something that you can get behind.
Yeah. And that scenario is just rampant, where the top individual contributors, promoted, and it's usually, and I don't want to paint them all with the same brush, but it's usually like the rah rah type A, ring the gong kind of guy, and you just think. So let me ask you this: going in there, what kind of things would you do to coach them, to having never, coached before? Because I think the big thing is here is you're now driving results through people, not product. And these are now women, and what motivates them. And even within the women, we're not grouping them together. So, where do you start when you're trying to coach someone like that?
Well, it's funny. The first time that I really saw a stark comparison of styles was a number of years ago when cold calling was still popular and people were expected to make, 80 or 100 dials, cold calls
Uh-huh.
a day. And some of the women that I knew were dabbling in LinkedIn and they were getting meetings and they would get several meetings set up and a manager would say, no, no, those don't count, that you can't do it that way. And I just thought, huh? But she got the
It counts.
meetings, right? And now she's going to close some business probably before you on your cold calls. And I'm all for, I wasn't against calling because that's the way I grew up in sales. But it was just interesting to acknowledge that people have different styles if they work. My thing was always if I'm hitting my numbers, nobody bothers me. And that's what I loved
Mhm.
about sales. I didn't want to be micromanaged. I think most people don't. I did my job, I did it well, and then I
Mhm.
went home. And so it allowed me to have more flexible work hours. It allowed me to not miss family things as a head of the household, single parent. It was really important that I had some flexible work hours and that I could work less hours if I got my work done. So that's what's great about sales. And when people change that and make it very difficult, that can be a real problem.
And I think, I had the same experience where everybody left me alone because I did my thing, right? I hit my numbers. And I think when you deviate from the process, but you're still achieving the results, and someone reprimands you or say, like, that's not the instructions, like, you have to say that's ego and that's just control, right? That's just the person's, that's insecurity.
Yeah, yeah, and, now I would challenge it. Back then, I probably went, "Okay,"
Yeah.
it took me time. I didn't know how to negotiate salary either. That was another thing that I wish that I had started off differently, and I always encourage women, to do that, even when they say sometimes they'll say, "Everybody gets the
Hmm.
same salary at this in this role." It's like, "Great, I need a week off at Christmas. Would that work for
Yeah.
you?" There's ways to negotiate. Sometimes I know a couple of women who came back from maternity leave and they felt like they really wanted to go for flexible hours. And so they didn't talk about salary when in fact they probably could have had a raise
Hmm.
and had flexible hours, but they chose, what they were going to fight
Hmm.
for.
And, that just saddens me to hear that because you can see that they've got their self-worth buried in that. And what strategies or tactics would you advise women now going in, even coming off mat leave or not, to really, bet on yourself and ask, know your worth and ask for it.
Yeah, and I think in some cases, they just didn't wanna rock the boat, like, they had a
Hmm.
role, they didn't wanna screw things up, and they felt I don't know if it was self worth as much as it was like, "Well, I'm just gonna ask for this so that I can keep this thing going because it's going really
Yeah.
well." But in fact, you could ask, what's the worst
Hmm.
thing that someone could say is, they could say
Hmm.
no. Or, you can have one or the other,
Yeah.
which one do you want? That and that would be great. So to push till you get the no is a great thing.
What advice would you say? Because a lot of women that I coach, and they're like, "Well, I don't want to ask this," and if even just to get out of their comfort zone and really find a way to dig deep, even for that moment, is there any technique or strategy you would advise them to use?
Well, one of the biggest reasons that it's important to do that is because it demonstrates your skill as a seller. If
Hmm.
you can't negotiate with with the company you work for, how could you negotiate with a buyer or a future customer? You need to be able to. So I love to see someone pushing the limits a little bit just to see how far that they can get. And again, anyone can say no and they can shut it down. But until you ask, even, and for women, to ask sooner, very early on about career opportunities within the role. This is something men are so good at.
Hmm.
In within days, sometimes a man will say, "Hey, Karen, I want to be sitting behind that microphone. How did you do it? What do I need to do to be sitting in that chair?"
Hmm.
Because we're assuming sometimes we think, well, I don't want to threaten my boss, that I want her job or his
Mm-hmm.
job. But in fact, let's just assume they're going to get promoted.
Yeah.
So, do you want someone else to take that role eventually, or maybe not? I was an individual contributor for a long time, but maybe my question is, how do I double my earnings? How do I work with bigger enterprise customers? Whatever it is, it's okay to ask,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't make you pushy or not grateful. It makes you curious, and curiosity is a great thing in sales.
Mm-hmm. It's an amazing thing. And I think women have those questions. Like they want to get behind the mic and they're thinking it, well, men just say it. Right. And so that's a challenge because I think there's a fine line and there's a bit of a double standard that, if I come across too aggressive, then I'm bitchy or I'm arrogant. Whereas, and I had this conversation before about women showing emotion in the boardroom. And maybe this one woman shared with me that she cried. And she wasn't happy that she did it, but then I was sharing the story with someone else and they said, but we applaud when men, bang their fist down, and that's also emotion, but that's acceptable. So it's two different styles, but why is one frowned upon and the other one's acceptable?
Right. Yeah, men show emotion through anger usually, or outrage, and women, we often cry.
Mhm.
And I did it a couple times myself, and over the years, and I think that having, again, it goes to leadership. You got to have a great leader, all the way up.
Mhm.
You need to find a company to work for where you really respect the people, and they're going to give you a little space to, have an issue here or there, have something that that you need to vent about in one way or another. That's what good leaders support that.
Mhm. Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that's when you look at the tenure of a leader now, which is still 19, 20 months, but even the tenure of a sales rep, like my last company before I went on my own was for 10 years. And I can say that's because I had a great boss. I mean, and it was a man. And I'll be honest, my male bosses were better than my female bosses. So this is not a, one against the other. It's how can we support one another and be allies?
Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely critical. I've had male and female leaders, and they were, some were not good, but it was mostly, I had so many more male leaders that it was mostly the male leaders that just could care less, that just didn't care about me or most of the other people on her team. And the leaders who will just write people off, like, Karen didn't listen to me last time, so I'm done with her.
Yeah.
You can't do that as a
Yeah.
leader. Your job is to help bring everybody up from where they
Mm-hmm.
are to
Mm-hmm.
where they need to be. And so don't write people off. And if your manager's written you off, that's a big red flag.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be looking at other opportunities where people will celebrate you and not just tolerate you.
I love that. Celebrate you, not just tolerate you. Because I know there's people and they're in that type of culture and they're saying I'm gonna leave, and they never do. And it's just it's toxic, but it's cyclical. And I just think at what point do you what by staying the damage is it's you're continuing to damage yourself. And I think over time, you're almost hardwiring, like you're doing physical damage that it's going to be irreparable regardless of where you go after the fact. So it's like it might be safe, it might be, you've been there forever, but at a certain point when it's no longer serving you and like you said, you're not getting the respect or the buy-in or the career development, like you have to take things into your own hands and go, I need to leave here.
Yeah, that's why I've always thought that you need to think of it as you incorporated. Even if you're working for a company, when you're in sales, you're the CEO of your territory.
Mhm.
And if you think about you incorporated, me incorporated in my case, it's like, what do I need? What would help me? And build your own plan, and then see how it matches up with where you're at. So you can try to do it objectively without just saying, oh, this is, they're not supporting me, it's not going to work. What is it that's missing?
Mhm.
Because you're not always going to find the perfect place, right? You're not going to find the perfect people. You're not going to find the perfect role. And sometimes we do have to put up with things that aren't exactly right. but it's really good to take an inventory periodically to kind of gauge, am I in a pretty good place? How well is this working for me? Is it affecting me after work hours? Is it keeping me up at night? Is it affecting, how I relate to the kids? And then if those things point toward yes, I would definitely look at some other options. It's always good to know what's out there.
Hmm. And what I was thinking about there is just being reflective. And I think when you say what I need, right away, Jamie comes in my mind, Jamie Diglio. But it's like, I think that's important for us to say, what do I need as a woman, as a sales rep, as, a wife, a mother, a friend, whatever we are. And just, we're so quick to serve others. And we're so maybe quick to say this isn't working, but maybe if we sat with it for a moment and says, well, how can I make it work? Like what is missing? And sometimes, it's something within us. And a lot of times I see that what's holding us back is something within us, whether it's an imposter syndrome, our mindset, or in our heads too much. And I think it's really important to just look inward sometimes and go, what do I need? I'm kind of short with people. I'm not doing this, and check in and be like, what's going on here?
Yeah. And then I'm thinking about a time where I had a pretty good job situation. I had, flexible hours in that if I hit my numbers, I could do whatever I wanted. I took off early, quite a bit. Um, I didn't get any reimbursement for professional development. So I could have said, well, I want to find a place that will do that. But in fact, I just covered my own professional development, and everything else about that job was really good until it wasn't,
Hmm.
until ultimately they didn't support me and promoted a guy over me for a big account. And then I left and took the business with me, rather than suing
Hmm.
in that case. So but it did what it needed to do. So it wasn't perfect, but it was really good in a lot of ways for a long time.
Hmm. And you and I both have a teaching background.
Yes.
Well, if I take the challengers 3 T's they coined, teach a tailored message while taking control. What are some ways that teaching do you feel has helped you in your sales career?
Yeah, I think someone told me the other day that one of their reps is a former teacher, and they go, he just talks too much. And I thought, well, that's not because he was a teacher. Okay. That's
Yeah.
something else, because we don't normally
Yeah.
do that. We don't, I never dominated a room as a teacher, but I think it's all teaching. It's all about educating people on, on how I can add value, on the products or services that I'm wanting to help you with. And even if you don't work with me, I want to connect you with people that can. It's just that it's that helper, it's a teacher helper thing that many of us grew up with. And, that's all I wanted to be when I grew up, was a teacher. That was my big dream.
Mhm. Well, you achieved it, but then what caused you to move into a sales role?
I made minimum wage.
Mhm.
So I couldn't afford, I became a single mom, and I just said, I want to make the same money as male peers. And
Mhm.
so I looked into jobs that could pay me more. And I went through this program called Non-Traditional Jobs for Women. And
Mm.
on Saturdays, I did that Saturday after Saturday, and I learned how to do all sorts of building trades kinds of things, like scaffolding and pouring cement, and
I love it.
and then I met the guy who talked about technology, and I went, ooh, maybe I could sell technology, because I had a background growing up in my grandmother's clothing store, family run business. I saw she was my model for sales. She sold people every day, and she was the nicest person you'd ever
Mhm.
know in a lot of ways, not always, but to the customers, she was very nice. And she had this way about her that was not pushy, and yet she did phenomenal numbers in the stores that she ran.
That's amazing. And when you think about your childhood and you had a good role model where she was nice, because that's not typically a characteristic you hear, as a young kid. It's for some reason you watched Glengarry Glen Ross when your parents were watching TV or something. Because I just remember my dad was in sales and going to, we'd go as a family for him to buy a suit. And I remember the guy saying to him, "You look great in this." And I was like, "That's the ugliest suit ever." And swimming on him. So my perception of retail sales, I guess, was like they're all liars and they're all sleazy and they're just commission breath. And that stayed with me. But it's interesting how your grandmother was a role model and you saw her as kind or nice, but yet she still achieved results. I'm wondering if that had a role in kind of, planting a seed at an early age and you becoming that person as well.
Yeah, I mean, part of it, she also had really good systems in
Hmm.
place. And so she only discounted once a year. And she had a mailing list, and we sent out 3,000 postcards that were handwritten, which was crazy back then. But that's how it went. And she also, she wouldn't lie, but she would say, a woman would say, I'm a size 8, and she would know that she really wasn't a size 8 by looking at her. And she'd say, just try this one on, it runs large, or it runs, yeah, large. And so, just try it
Yeah.
on, honey, that's what she'd say.
Aw.
Just try it on. And then but then she'd show her with scarves
Uh-huh.
and, accessories and jewelry, how she ended up looking like $1,000,000, and that's what she did, which was to add value. So I think, kindness was important, and it wasn't all kindness in a store with, lots of people coming and going and different salespeople. But it was a really good lesson. And but I also had, I had other family members that, that did not offer the same positive lessons. So I think it all balances out. We all have those things in our families, right? We all have different issues that we deal
Yeah.
with.
You were jaded by it like the rest of us for sales as well. I'm sure you saw all sides of it. A lot of what you do is bringing women together, advocating, and just having a strong sense of, bringing women into leadership so much that you wrote a book about it. So talk to us about like, did you always want to write a book? Where did kind of She Sells come out of? Was it just like after the pandemic, you really wanted to raise awareness about this to make the change? Or what was that emotional drive inside you that said, I got to put pen to paper?
I started She Sells before the pandemic, actually, and it just took a really long time. I changed it midway through the pandemic, and it came out differently than I had originally planned. But the premise for She Sells is that there's a lot of systemic issues. There are a lot of things that women can't change or fix. And I wanted this book to be for leaders in companies who are mostly male, sales managers, VP sales, and above, and then the actual leaders of the company, to understand that it's there are things you can do to get more women to apply, to fill up your pipeline when you're hiring. And then there are things you can do in the onboarding and retention process to keep more women from leaving, because a lot of women have left roles where it's a male majority and it feels like a locker room.
Hmm.
For example, they don't like the language, or they don't like the sports incessant talk, or they're just tired of being looked at, in a certain way. And so those are the things where the good leaders, male leaders, will say to the whole team, this is a professional space, or this is, we're a professional team. We're not going to have talk like that. We're
Hmm.
not going to have, we're not going to go to the bar after work. People can do what they want, but as a group, as a leader, the leader sets a tone, and that has nothing to do with something a woman can do to stay. It's more about the environment. And if you have a compelling environment that I want to work in, whether I'm female or male, then that's awesome. And
Hmm.
so that's what I was trying to convey with the book, that there are many things that can be done by our allies to encourage and promote women. The next book is called She Leads, and that's what we can do as women ourselves. And it's I wanted to do the other one first because I didn't want, just like we were talking about apologizing and your guess that you had about apologizing. It's if a woman wants to apologize, that's fine. As a professional in sales, here's how it helps me by not doing it
Mhm.
so much. So it's not like you have to change this. Women are always accused of, her voice. Oh, it's so grating, or her look, or her eyelashes are too long, those false eyelashes. It's always it's like, you know, that there's a certain point where it's like, okay, stop putting people down,
Yeah.
and let's just accept people as they want to present themselves. If they want some advice, they want to be more professional, we have some ideas for them.
Mhm.
Just like little skinny heels,
Mhm.
that they don't, when you walk in tall skinny heels, they don't support you well, and you don't have a look of power. And
Mhm.
and so, there's a reason why someone might want to consider something else rather than just, put someone down for how they dress, or the shoes they wear, or their hairstyle. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of ways people put women down, and I wanted to write a book that shows, here are things you can do if you choose to do them, and it will make you more professional in a professional workspace, to help you go up the ladder if you want to.
Mhm. And what have been some of the responses as a result of that? Have you heard feedback from companies that they have incorporated this and implemented some of the strategies and they've seen a shift?
Oh yeah, with the She Sells book, absolutely. I mean, there are tips at the back of each chapter, and strategies. So people that put them in place see positive changes. So
Mhm.
yeah, we get that feedback all the time, which is wonderful. It's very
Mhm.
reassuring.
Well, it's gotta make you feel, like this is why I did it, and the fact that they're doing it and it's seeing it like I'm making my move and, my mark in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's stuff that I've said 100 times, and
Yeah.
so I
Now
just
it's
put it
just
on paper, really.
you
You'd
coined
think
it.
it would have been quicker to do, but it still took forever.
A lot of companies I see and they say just to support what you're saying is that, they want to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And, to do that, they're going to hire women or they're going to do some things that they feel are in line with that. But when the culture and nothing else changes, but yet you insert a woman in it or a woman in color, and they're like, "Yeah, we're compliant." And then the woman leaves because it's a crappy, like, she's still the only woman. They're still treating her like crap. And then they kind of maybe take a spin at, well, she was the wrong hire, or this is the way women act. And they kind of paint that experience with one brush. And I'm like, yeah, but you didn't change, you didn't create an inclusive culture. You just opened a gap for someone to come in that was never going to succeed in the first place. So how much of that is actually going on?
Yeah, I mean, that was the whole premise of that first book, is that there's a lot of systemic things that happen because men built business and men built sales. And to a large extent, there's a conference going on today while we're recording, it has lots of male speakers, for example. And when it's not equal, or there are a few women on the main stage, but most are men, and most of the people running a sales related event are men. And you learn, if you're a woman new to sales, you learn, well, this is still a man's world, and
Mhm.
I don't know how I can fit in, and I'll have to do the best I can. So it's the men that will roll up their sleeves and say, listen, we want a more inclusive team. We know that we're going to do better if we build an inclusive team. Those are the people that I like working with.
Yeah.
I'm not here to change their minds. I mean, there's still some manufacturing teams that I talked to, a head of sales who said their CEO would not hire women in field sales.
Mhm.
And I was like, all right, well, I don't have time for them.
Yeah.
You know, there's not enough in my brain to help that company. But the ones that say, hey, we're trying, but the women are leaving, then we can sit down and talk about, well, what's happening? What are you doing? What are the issues? And then we can figure it out and help them to improve so that that doesn't happen in the future.
Mhm. And I agree with those who recognize that an inclusive or diverse team far performs a homogeneous team, and the quicker they can get on board. I mean, think about a lot of people are in sales for the money. Like, you bring diversity into your team, you're going to make more money, or that's one of the motivators. But I think when I hear things like what you said about speakers and conferences, and even going through the ranks of sales, it was always male, and it bothered me because that's all I knew. Like, I kind of became male because there was no contrast. And so I became very masculine. And you and I have talked about this back in the early 2000s.
Wore the suits
You
with the
wore the
shoulder
suit.
pads.
You look like IBM. You had the suit, the navy, and it's just you're kind of in you're I have no one to be mad at because it was the time that it was in. But all I can say is now when I'm at events and conferences and it's all men, like, I think that's why my voice has gotten stronger now because I'm like, A, I have to make up for lost time, but also B, just for any woman now and nowadays that thinks this has to be the same, it's like you have to challenge that. You have to again, not wait to be asked. Put your name in. Why aren't you speaking up there? Forget for them to wait. You put your name in there and not wait for things to be asked and just take control a little bit more too.
Yeah, put flowers at your desk if you want them. You don't have to be just like the guys. You
Yeah.
can have some personality and bring as much of yourself as you're comfortable. You may not feel comfortable bringing your full self, and I understand that.
Mhm.
So bring at least as much as you can, as much as you feel comfortable, because we all have a point of view, and we all have a story, we all have a place that we're coming from, and it doesn't have to be the same as everybody else.
Mhm. I think that, our uniqueness and our authenticity is our differentiator. So if you can bring something that's your story, no one can compete with your story. Like, that's where you're going to start stepping outside or moving apart from the commoditization that you're most likely in.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I agree.
So if people are listening to you, Lori, and they're just thinking, I hear all this, and I'm motivated in the moment, but then when it comes time to post or when it comes time to ask for that promotion or comes time to lean in and, offer my suggestion at the meeting, and I kind of choke up a little bit, what's one or two things that you can share with them that just, allows them to kind of find this inner strength somewhere and just ask the question or lean in even amongst the discomfort?
You have to start small. So take a baby step and make a decision that you're going to comment in this meeting, or you're going to add to what someone said, even to say, "Hey, I like what Karen just said. That's a great point." Or to stick up for someone else, for another woman who speaks up and maybe gets, plowed over by someone else's comments. You can do it in a lot of different ways. Start small and just have the intention when you come into a meeting that you're going to sit at the main table if you're in person. If it's virtual, you're going to have a comment and make a specific comment, and maybe next time you'll have more to say, but do that much so that you're participating, because leadership wants to see that. They want people
Mhm.
to be participating.
I love that. I love that. So start small, be intentional, and whatever you set out to do, whether it's a comment, a question, do it. And I think if you wait for the moment and go, well, maybe, you have to declare it before you go in there so that you're more committed.
Yeah, I'm still someone who I'm very much, I think it's because when I worked in childcare, I worked with international children from all over the world, and the other teachers were international as well. And I worked with these two Korean women, and people thought that they didn't understand English because they didn't talk. But in
Mhm.
fact, they understood everything. And we're
Mhm.
just sitting back listening, and then they
Mm.
would, they would give their comment after the fact, and I like that very much. I was very impressionable in my early 20s in that role, and it helped me to realize I don't have to be the first one to speak. I don't have to be
Mm.
the loudest one to speak. But if I can get something in, choose your battles. If I can pick one thing and then make sure that I bring that up, that's going to make me feel good. But you don't have to be the loudest or the biggest or the baddest.
Mhm.
Just get in there and be a part of it.
Mhm. I love that. And I feel that almost comes to you the more you go through life.
Yeah, definitely. And then that's gives them, big shout out for, anti-ageism because as
Mhm.
the population's getting older, there's an article in the latest Harvard Business Review about how many, I think 1,000 people in the US turn 65 every day. I think that's right.
Mhm.
And there are some wise people who have been written off by a lot of, I mean, I got
Mhm.
written off in tech in my 40s. That was like way too old for to be in tech. And it's like, really? Um, and so
Yeah.
don't write off the fact that there's some wisdom out there that you can gain. And if you're young in a sales role or whatever role you're in, learn from older people that have some wisdom, and they'll learn from you as well. That's a really great pairing as a young and older
Yeah.
person. So much to learn from each other.
It's true. I see that in a lot of groups when initially they're like, what do I have to in common here? And I'm like, nothing. That's the beautiful part. Like you can, learn the technology, the nuances, but then they can leverage your years of experience. And there's things in sales that are, stand the test of time, that are tried and true, and they've been doing it and most likely seeing the success. So I agree with you. I think that's a fantastic pairing to really create synergies that will help both. Well, listen, thank you so much, Lori. Love hearing your story and love what you do for everybody. So thank you for being such an advocate for women in sales, not only in March, but every day. So we appreciate you and thank you. And if those are listening want to learn more about you or perhaps connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, the best way would be through LinkedIn, Lori Richardson. If you just type Lori Richardson sales, you'll probably find me, and put in the connection note that you heard this podcast, because I get a lot of requests and I don't always connect with everybody,
Hmm.
nor do I do it quickly sometimes. So I always look for notes first,
Hmm.
for messages first. I scroll down, and I'll accept those first. So that's a little tip for others too, probably to connect with anyone that way.
Absolutely. That's a differentiator for sales. So a great point. And thank you so much, Lori. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And we'll see you next time.